The recent spate of appointments announced by the future president has been a little bit like drinking out of a fire hose. Cabinet appointments fast and furious, and some are just struggling to keep a pace. Today, we're going to catch our breath and discuss what it all means. Here to serve as guide is Nick Allard. He's founding dean of the Jacksonville University College of Law. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Nick, you have a varied and impressive resume. I mean, you have been you worked at Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge. You've clerked for some very prestigious federal judges, but you also worked closely with some senators, including the late Senator Edward Kennedy, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who you were his chief of staff. So you're familiar with the Senate nominating process. Just, big picture, how are things different so far this go round?
Well, they're very different in the sense that the out of the blocks, the president's nominations, which ordinarily are given a lot of deference, have been severely questioned. And also, the sort of norms in approaching the confirmation process, which has been very well established over the years, have been breached. There's discussions about not vetting them with the FBI, but using private investigators to vet, and also a lot of discussion about recess appointments, which would intentionally sidestep the constitutional power and responsibility of the Senate to advise and consent or reject. That's right in the Constitution.
So there is this process, as you mentioned, called advise and consent. Explain what that looks like in a typical administration.
Well, there's three steps. First is the president, the White House, decides they have different candidates. They decide who to nominate, and that's based on a careful, very thorough clearance process where they do investigations, background checks, and so on.
And we're talking about cabinet level positions and then
Correct.
sort of the top department heads, all of the secretaries of the various agencies.
That's right. There,
Okay.
there used to be 1,200 plus of these advise and consent, and now they've been sharply reduced to about 160, 170. But it's still a very thorough process, or it has been. And we get a. I've just editorialized here a little bit. We get a sense that some of these have been almost spontaneous. The last couple of people that talked to the president have persuaded him to announce that he's nominated some of these folks. And then the second step is it goes to the Senate, United States Senate, under Article 2, Section 2. The Senate has the co-responsibility, co-equal responsibility in the nomination process. It is their responsibility to advise and consent or reject nominees. Now, that rarely happens in history, but the possibility this is going to happen right out of the blocks is in itself unique. The third step is if they vote to confirm, and now there's no filibuster for nominations. The Democrats did that in 2013. They took away that.
Got rid of the filibuster for appointments.
Exactly. So you just need a simple majority, 51 votes, for somebody to be confirmed. And then after confirmation, the president swears in the candidate and hands them their commission, a big piece of paper with you can hang on your wall and be very proud of. So those are the three steps. Those are the three ordinary steps. But we've got a lot of drama already, big surprise in this new administration.
And so the speed of these announcements is a little different, certainly different than the first Trump administration. But the nature of who's being nominated in some cases has been itself very surprising, even to some, stalwart Republicans and strong supporters of the president, of the future president.
I'd have to agree with that. I think that it's really surprising how many of the nominees. Now, there's some that are just going to probably sail through, which is ordinarily the case, and they have more than adequate. Some of them have excellent qualifications. The tradition is that there's great deference to the president's nominees.
Because this is his cabinet.
It's his cabinet, but he's also implicit in that is that he's trusted to be picking people who are qualified or can serve well. But the Senate has the responsibility to have its own independent. Usually happens at the committee process, where at the committee level, where they review the candidates and then decide. But usually, the president is nominating people who are within the realm of being acceptable. So, for example, take the Matt Gaetz Department of Justice nominee nomination, which already looks like it's in some trouble. Apparently, the president has softened his support for him a little bit this morning, according to the news. But there are many, many, many highly qualified, very tough Republican lawyers who would sail through. But instead, and it's a big legitimate question to ask, is why would the president and why would his advisors go along with nominating somebody who is so controversial and put his fellow Republicans in the Senate and elsewhere on a tough spot, having to perhaps, given their legitimate concerns, go along. But we'll see whether that nomination actually succeeds.
So these hearings that are held to vet a candidate they're sort of held by the appropriate
Correct.
Senate committee, and they're sometimes televised, depending on kind of how high profile
Oh,
the
these will be televised.
um, and so that's a questioning process. But the vetting process that you're talking about, which is typically done by the FBI, is separate and distinct. What would be the rationale for not having the Justice Department do those background checks, be they criminal or just sort of their situational background?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise that there's a real cynicism with the president and within a lot of the Trump supporters about not only the competence but the bias of the FBI. I will make a personal comment here. Personal. This is not anybody that's affiliated with me at the law school, but that I have a high respect for the quality of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and having when I was on the Senate Judiciary staff, we handled many confirmations and nominations. The FBI did a superb deep dive job, and they generally do a very good job. So there's that skepticism, but also maybe you don't want to find out the bad news, and but they're apparently holding private investigators and relying on outside vendors to do that, and who knows whether that becomes public or not. So.
And so, because some of these nominees, you mentioned Matt Gaetz for Attorney General as one of them. I mean, some of them are controversial in other ways. He's probably, the lightning rod of all of them. Um, because they're so controversial, there's actually been discussion about whether the Senate would be willing to forego its role in that advice and consent um, duty that they have, almost to avoid having to make a public choice or to
through the
ask those
through
tough
the recess
questions.
appointment process. I think that's what you're asking about, and I don't expect that to happen.
You don't.
Um, the Senate takes its prerogatives and its role very seriously, as they should, and recess appointments have been made in the past in significantly large numbers, but that's really declined sharply since the Obama administration, and it requires basically the Senate has been taking less and less, fewer and fewer recesses in order to block that process. And I would expect that they'll go through the regular order and examine most of the candidates in that way. It's possible, but usually they have something called a pro forma session where one senator can go in and open the session, then close it shortly afterwards, just to keep Congress in session in order to avoid the recess appointments.
It's interesting. I mean, the future president Trump said on X just a couple weeks ago, this is before they chose the new Senate leader, saying any Republican senator seeking the coveted leadership position in the U.S. Senate must agree to recess appointments in the Senate. And then, of course, the Senate did go on to choose a candidate other than his favored um, majority leader position. The Trump administration supported Rick Scott, Florida Senator Rick Scott, and in the end, they chose John Thune instead, who is seen as having somewhat more independence from Donald Trump.
Well, I've observed him through many Senate Majority Leader votes and seen him on both sides of the aisle, and they are very odd and strange things. But one thing is that they reflect the independence and prerogatives of the United States Senate. First of all, the secret ballots. So every senator tells all the candidates that they're going to support them. I'm being a little cynical and sort of exaggerate to make the point. You never know what's going to happen. But in this case, I think the selection of Thune, who is the most independent in the past, has had some tension with President Trump, was significant and a tell that they're going to take this. He's an institutionalist, and I think that is a strong indicator that they're going to follow the regular order as much as they can.
We were talking about the recent appointment announcements in the Trump administration and the confirmation process that we can anticipate will take place. early next year. I'm talking with Nick Allard. He's the founding dean of the Jacksonville University School of Law, and you're welcome to join our conversation. You can give us a call. We're at 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to First Coast Connect at wjct.org or reach out on social media. Um, so that what you're referring to is a secret vote for majority leader, and the vote sort of went against Donald Trump's prerogatives. But the Senate confirmation process would be public, as would the decision to have a process, as opposed to allowing for a recess appointment process. Um, that would not be something that would be secret. And whoever, I would imagine, would take a stance against the president in his party is going to attract some probably unwanted attention.
But the president already is a lame duck. Most of the senators who are Republican senators are either just elected or they're going to be in office or aspire to be in office after President Trump steps down. Now, there's 14 words in the United States Constitution that basically say that no person can be elected twice and serve twice as a president. So they're not lame ducks. He is, and they have a longer view and longer vision. So that's one thing that will mitigate against that. And I am sure that they're going to be deferential to the president's choices when they feel they comfortably can be. But at the same time, I don't think they can be taken for granted. And they're going to exercise their own independent judgment and responsibility. They're inclined to want to support him. It's very, very rare, actually. I was surprised, actually, to be reminded of this the other day. It's rare for a president's nominee for one of these top positions to be voted down. John Tower was the last time, I think, in 1989. And usually what happens is they withdraw before there's a vote, or no vote. The majority leader is unwilling to schedule it for a vote, and then finally the president comes up with another nominee. So they don't actually get to a vote. Now, Trump's confrontational style may result in something different. I'm really out of the business of trying to predict things that he'll do, but basically, I think that's how it's going to go.
We've got a call from Charles on the west side. Good morning, Charles. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. So could you explain about the recess appointments that could possibly happen then?
Well, I'll try. There's a provision in the Constitution in Article 2 that says that vacancies can be filled if the Senate is in recess. In 2016, the Supreme Court said that they have to be at least 10 days in recess
Before these recess appointments can happen.
before the appointment. It just can't be a short, or it has to be a real recess. So first of all, that has to happen, and the Senate hasn't been going into recess because they don't. It doesn't matter which party it is; they don't particularly like recess appointments. It circumvents this process, but they can happen, and they have happened in the past. And so what happens, and the reason for this provision in the Constitution was in the horse and buggy era, people were away. There were short sessions and long recesses and adjournments, so the government had to run, and so there had to be a provision for people, the president, who's supposed to execute the laws, to have people in his administration. But this provision now is looked at as a way to end run the Senate, and the Senate has mechanisms in their power to frustrate it and slow it down. But it can be used, and if they go into recess, there could well be recess appointments.
Well, Nick Allard, there's so much more to talk about. I hope we get to have you back as this process continues and as we get into the nominating process itself. But Nick Allard, Dean of the Jacksonville University Law School, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I mean, I've only been a Republican for 2 weeks now, so I hope I was able to add something. But
We appreciate it. Thanks, Nick. Coming up,